For a decade, Catherine Davenport was the perfect millionaire's wife. She was an elegant, silent accessory on the arm of her titan of industry husband, Alistair Finch. While he and his brazen mistress, Crystal Vance, built a life of glittering excess, they saw Catherine as little more than a relic, a piece of old money furniture in their modern world. They mocked her quiet grace and whispered jokes at galas, and laughed at her traditional values behind the closed doors of their shared penthouse. They were convinced they held all the power, all the money, and all the future. But they made one fatal mistake: they never once looked into the history of the fortune they were so proud of. What happens when the trophy wife they dismissed holds the key to the entire empire? And what happens when she decides to turn that key? The air in the penthouse, perched 60 stories above the glittering sprawl of downtown Chicago, was always chilled to a precise 68 degrees. It was a temperature Alistair Finch had decided upon, just as he had decided upon the stark white marble floors, the minimalist German furniture that looked better than it felt, and the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of the city he believed he owned. Catherine Davenport Finch had long ago learned to wear cashmere sweaters indoors. Tonight the chill felt particularly biting. It was the night of the annual Children's Hospital Foundation Gala, an event Catherine had chaired for the past 5 years. It was her one domain, a corner of their gilded life, where she felt a sense of purpose. Her family, the Davenports, had been patrons of this hospital for 3 generations. It was in her blood. Alistair stood before the vast plate-glass window, a flute of champagne in his hand, looking not at the view, but at his own reflection. He was a handsome man, sculpted by expensive personal trainers, and tailored in a Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars. His success was his identity. Finch Global, the private equity firm he'd built, was a behemoth swallowing up smaller companies with a ruthless efficiency that Wall Street both feared and admired. "Are you ready, darling?" he asked, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of impatience. He didn't turn around. Catherine clasped the necklace around her neck. It was a sapphire and diamond piece, a Davenport heirloom passed down from her grandmother. It was understated, elegant, and heavy with the weight of memory. "Almost," she replied, her voice soft. That's when Crystal Vance made her entrance. She didn't walk into the room. She burst into it, a whirlwind of sequined gold fabric, a cloud of Tom Ford perfume, and a laugh that was just a little too loud. Crystal was Alistair's executive vice president. That was her official title. Her unofficial one, known to everyone in their circle, was his mistress. "Allie, darling, you look like a king surveying his kingdom." Crystal purred, sliding up beside him and placing a perfectly manicured hand on his chest. Her dress was cut daringly low, a stark contrast to Catherine's classic navy blue gown. Alistair finally turned, a genuine smile gracing his lips for the first time that evening. "And you look like the Queen," he murmured, his eyes sweeping over Crystal in a way he hadn't looked at Catherine in years. Catherine felt the familiar dull ache in her chest. She had learned to compartmentalize this pain, to pack it away like winter clothes. She was a Davenport. Davenports did not make scenes. They endured. Crystal's eyes, sharp and calculating, flickered over to Catherine. They settled on the necklace. "Oh, Catherine, that's a lovely piece. Very historical." The word historical was delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel meant to wound. It was their favorite insult. Catherine was old world and antique. They were the future. "It was my grandmother's," Catherine said, her chin held high. "How sweet," Crystal said, her lips pulling back in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She turned back to Alistair. "I was just closing the acquisition of Arrow North. Their board folded an hour ago. We got it for a song." "That's my girl." Alistair beamed, squeezing her arm. "A killer in heels. We should celebrate tonight. After this dreary hospital thing, of course." The dreary hospital thing that would raise over $10 million for pediatric cancer research. The dreary hospital thing that Catherine had poured her soul into for 6 months. She said nothing. She merely picked up her clutch and walked towards the door. The car is waiting. The gala was a sea of glittering gowns and dark tuxedos at the city's most opulent hotel ballroom. Catherine moved through the crowd with practiced grace, a queen in her element. Here the name Davenport still meant something more than just money. It meant legacy integrity. Donors and board members greeted her with genuine warmth and respect. She saw Alistair and Crystal across the room. They weren't being discreet. He had his arm wrapped possessively around Crystal's waist as he introduced her to a banking magnate. They were laughing heads close together. At one point, Crystal glanced over at Catherine, caught her eye, and whispered something in Alistair's ear. He threw his head back and laughed, a loud, booming sound that carried across the ballroom. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pierced through Catherine's carefully constructed composure. It wasn't just the affair. It was the mockery. It was the blatant public disrespect in a space she considered sacrosanct. They weren't just cheating. They were enjoying rubbing her face in it. Later, during the live auction, Catherine was on stage speaking about a new wing for the neonatal intensive care unit. She spoke with passion and eloquence, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. As the bidding began on a Patek Philippe watch Alistair had donated at her insistence, she saw him at his table. Crystal was leaning into him, her lips against his ear. He was nodding, a smirk on his face. He picked up his phone, typed something, and showed it to Crystal. She giggled, covering her mouth as she looked directly at Catherine on the stage. Catherine faltered for a second, her words catching in her throat. What had he typed? Look at her up there playing the saint. So boring. Can't wait to get you home. She recovered quickly, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped, if only for a moment. In that instant, under the hot stage lights surrounded by the city's elite, Catherine Davenport Finch felt a profound shift. The dull ache of endurance was sharpening. It was turning into something harder, something colder. It was turning into resolve. When she stepped off the stage to a round of thunderous applause, her polite smile was a mask of iron. As she passed their table, she heard Alistair say to Crystal, his voice a low, condescending drawl. See? She's good at that sort of thing. Charity. It keeps her busy. He thought he was consigning her to a life of irrelevance. He believed her world was small and insignificant, a quaint hobby. He and Crystal were the main event. She was the opening act nobody watched. Walking back to her own seat, Catherine's hand instinctively went to her grandmother's necklace. It wasn't just historical. It was foundational. And Alistair, in his blinding arrogance, had forgotten one crucial thing about foundations: you can't build an empire without one. And sometimes the person you ignore is the one standing on the bedrock. The last laugh, she thought, wouldn't be his. It would be hers. And it would be devastating. The weeks following the gala were an exercise in escalating audacity. Alistair, buoyed by his recent business victories and Crystal's fawning admiration, shed the last vestiges of discretion. It was as if he and Crystal were engaged in a perverse competition to see how far they could push Catherine before she broke. Crystal started appearing at their penthouse more frequently, always under the guise of late-night work sessions. Catherine would hear their laughter echoing from Alistair's home office, a sound that curdled the quiet of the sprawling apartment. She found Crystal's expensive leather briefcase by the front door in the morning, a territorial marking. Once she found a single long blonde hair on a pillow in the guest room Crystal often used to freshen up. The staff, loyal but terrified of Alistair, would avert their eyes, their silence a testament to the household's unspoken truth. The breaking point, however, did not come in the sterile quiet of their home. It came as so many society dramas do at the exclusive Glenview Country Club, a bastion of old money and manicured lawns where the Davenports had been members since its founding. It was a brilliant Saturday in June. Catherine was hosting a small luncheon for the Hospital Foundation's key patrons. It was a relaxed affair on the terrace overlooking the 18th green. The conversation was light, the iced tea was sweet, and for a few hours Catherine felt a semblance of peace. Then Alistair arrived. Unannounced. He strode onto the terrace dressed in golf attire that shouted its expense. And right behind him, like a brightly colored venomous snake, was Crystal clad in tennis whites, so pristine they seemed to have been created that morning. A hush fell over Catherine's table. The ladies, all from families who understood protocol and decency, looked from Catherine to Alistair, and back again, their polite smiles freezing on their faces. "Catherine, darling," Alistair boomed, feigning surprise. "Didn't realize you'd be here. Crystal and I just finished a round. Thought we'd grab a bite." He was lying. His golf shoes were immaculate, not a speck of grass on them. Crystal waved a little too enthusiastically. "Hi, everyone," she chirped as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Catherine's blood ran cold. This was a calculated invasion. The country club was her territory, a place tied to her family, her identity. By bringing Crystal here, Alistair was making a statement nowhere was safe for her. Nothing was sacred. His world was subsuming hers entirely. "Alistair," Catherine said, her voice dangerously level, "this is a private luncheon." "Oh, don't be so stuffy," he scoffed, pulling a chair from an empty table and placing it next to his wife. He gestured for Crystal to do the same. "There's plenty of room. We won't be long." The other women at the table were mortified. They offered tight-lipped, awkward greetings to Crystal, who preened under the attention. Alistair proceeded to dominate the conversation loudly, recounting a recent corporate raid, peppering his story with financial jargon designed to impress and exclude. Crystal would interject with details, playing the part of the indispensable partner. "And the best part," Alistair was saying, "is that their CEO, poor old Henderson, never saw it coming. We used a subsidiary holding company, a ghost corp, really, to buy up the debt. By the time he realized what was happening, we owned him. He was practically crying in the boardroom." Crystal laughed. He kept talking about a gentleman's agreement. So quaint. Catherine sat in stony silence, the perfect hostess mask cemented to her face. But beneath it she was listening. Really listening. Alistair had always been dismissive of her intelligence, especially in business. He'd pat her head and tell her not to worry her pretty little head with the complexities of his work. Because of this, he had grown careless. He mentioned the name of the holding company they'd used, Argent Allied Partners. The name snagged in Catherine's mind. Argent, silver, allied. It sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. The excruciating lunch finally ended. Alistair and Crystal departed as brazenly as they had arrived, leaving a crater of social awkwardness in their wake. Catherine's guests, ever polite, made their excuses and left quickly, their pity hanging in the air like cheap perfume. Left alone at the table, Catherine stared out at the perfect green, her mind racing. Argent Allied Partners. Why did that name bother her? She spent the rest of the weekend in a fog, the name echoing in her thoughts. On Monday morning, she went to her late father's study. It was a room Alistair never entered, filled with old leather-bound books, maritime maps, and generations of Davenport family records. Her father, Augustus Davenport, had been a quiet, formidable man. A shipping magnate who had diversified the family's old-world fortune into modern investments with shrewd, silent precision. He had passed away 3 years ago, leaving Catherine a substantial but complex inheritance, managed by the family's long-time legal firm. She went to his old mahogany desk and began opening drawers. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. A feeling, a clue. In the bottom right drawer, beneath a stack of old property deeds, she found a set of leather-bound journals. Her father's private ledgers. She opened the one from 10 years ago, the year she and Alistair were married. Her father hadn't been thrilled about the match. "He's too loud, Catherine," he'd said. "Men who have to shout about their success are often standing on hollow ground." She flipped through the pages filled with her father's elegant cursive script. It was mostly notes on shipping routes, commodity prices, stock performances. And then she saw it. An entry dated a week after her wedding, meeting with Abernathy. Established new holding coder for Alistair's initial venture capital. A safety net. He must believe it's his own victory. Call it Argent Allied Partners. He'll like the sound of it. A wedding gift of a different sort. Let's see what the boy can build in the sandbox. Catherine dropped the journal. The heavy book hit the Persian rug with a dull thud. The room spun. A sandbox. a safety net. Argent Allied Partners wasn't a ghost corp Alistair had brilliantly created. It was a wedding gift from her father. A pre-funded entity designed to give her ambitious new husband the seed capital and connections he needed to get started, all while making him think he had done it himself. Her father had built a sandbox for the loud, arrogant boy his daughter had married. He had given Alistair a protected playpen to build his castles, incomplete with invisible walls and a soft landing for when he fell. Alistair's entire empire, Finch Global, the source of his pride, his power, his very identity, it was all built on a lie. A lie he didn't even know existed. The mockery, the condescension, the affair with Crystal, it all took on a new hideous dimension. He was a king, crowing from the top of a plastic castle, laughing at the woman whose family had not only built the castle, but had put it in the sandbox and supplied all the toys. Catherine slowly bent down and picked up the journal. Her hands were shaking, but not from shock anymore. It was from a surge of icy, clarifying rage. The game had changed. They thought they were playing chess and she was a forgotten pawn. They were about to find out she was the one who owned the entire board. She walked out of the study and picked up her phone. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years. Abernathy and Cole, good morning. It's Catherine Finch, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. I need to speak with Mr. Abernathy, immediately. Tell him, it's about the sandbox. The offices of Abernathy and Cole were the antithesis of Finch Global. Where Alistair's headquarters were all glass chrome and aggressive modern art, the family law firm was a sanctuary of dark wood worn leather and the faint, comforting scent of old paper and Earl Grey tea. It was a place where secrets were kept for generations. Mr. Howard Abernathy was as much a fixture as the grandfather clock in the lobby. He was a man in his late 70s with eyes that had seen the Gilded Age fortunes of Chicago families rise and fall. He had been Augustus Davenport's closest friend and consigliere. When Catherine was shown into his office, he rose slowly, his expression a mixture of warmth and solemnity. "Catherine," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone, "it has been too long. I was so sorry to hear about, well, the rumors." "The rumors are true, Howard," Catherine said, dispensing with pleasantries. She sat opposite his massive oak desk. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here about the sandbox." Abernathy's eyebrows, thick and white, shot up. He sat back down, steepling his fingers. A flicker of something, respect, perhaps even excitement, danced in his old eyes. "Ah, so you found the journals." "I have," Catherine said. "And now I want you to tell me everything. Every detail Alistair doesn't know. I want to see the architecture of this deception." For the next 3 hours, with the door closed and the tea growing cold, Howard Abernathy walked Catherine through the masterpiece of financial illusion her father had constructed. It was more intricate than she could have ever imagined. Argent Allied Partners was just the beginning. Augustus Davenport, deeply skeptical of Alistair's character, but wanting his daughter to be happy and secure, had devised a plan of breathtaking complexity. "Your father called it the guided venture," Abernathy explained, pulling out thick, dust-covered binders. "He didn't just give Alistair seed money. He created an entire ecosystem around him. Alistair's first genius move, buying a struggling logistics company, had been prearranged. The company was owned by another Davenport holding company. Its board was instructed by Augustus to accept Alistair's lowball offer. The crucial client contracts that suddenly materialized, saving the company and making Alistair look like a visionary. They were with businesses secretly controlled by or heavily indebted to Davenport Shipping. His first hostile takeover, the target company's primary lender, was a bank where the Davenports held a controlling interest. At a secret command from Augustus, the bank had tightened the company's credit line, making it vulnerable. Alistair just had to walk through the door her father had kicked open. Every major success Alistair has had for the first 5 years was facilitated, Abernathy said carefully. Your father's contacts in banking and politics and international trade, they were all quietly told to take Alistair's calls to give him favorable terms. He believed he was a brilliant networker, a charismatic deal-maker. In reality, he was calling a list of people who were already prepared to say yes. Catherine felt a wave of nausea. So his entire reputation is built on a stage your father built with props your father provided and a script your father wrote, Abernathy finished. After the first 5 or 6 years, Finch Global had enough momentum and capital to operate more independently. Your father slowly withdrew the guidance. But the foundation, the bedrock of the entire enterprise, is pure Davenport. And the prenup? Catherine asked, her voice a whisper. This was the document Alistair had always been so proud of. He'd had his shark-like lawyers draft it, and he'd often joked about how ironclad it was. Abernathy allowed himself a small, dry smile. Ah, the prenuptial agreement. Alistair's masterpiece. He was so focused on protecting the future earnings of Finch Global from you. He made sure the language specified that anything generated by the company would be considered his sole and separate property in the event of a divorce. So I get nothing from it, Catherine stated. On the contrary, Abernathy said, leaning forward. Your father and I reviewed his draft. We saw his focus, and we added one very simple, very elegant clause of our own. Clause 11B. Alistair's lawyers barely glanced at it, dismissing it as boilerplate. He slid a document across the desk. It was their prenup. He pointed to a paragraph of dense legalese. It states, Abernathy translated, that any foundational asset, seed capital, or enabling entities established by third parties and for the benefit of the marital union would, in the case of dissolution, revert to the estate of the originating party or their designated heir. Catherine read it twice. Her heart began to pound. And foundational assets includes. It includes by a very specific and legally documented trail Argent Allied Partners and the 3 other primary holding companies your father used to build the sandbox, Abernathy confirmed, which means in the event of a divorce, the very seed from which Finch Global grew and all assets directly traceable to it, which is to say the controlling interest in the entire company, reverts to you as your father's designated heir. Catherine stared at the lawyer, her mind reeling. Alistair hadn't just been played, he had been checkmated 10 years before the game even started. His ironclad prenup wasn't a shield to protect his assets from her. It was a self-destruct mechanism that would hand his entire empire over to her. He thinks it protects him. She breathed, a disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. He was so busy ensuring you couldn't take a slice of his pie, Abernathy said, that he never bothered to check who owned the bakery. The nausea was gone, replaced by a feeling of dizzying power. This was better than revenge. This was poetic justice of a cosmic order. There's more, Abernathy added, his tone sobering. Alistair has grown reckless. He's leveraging the company to its absolute limit for this new Odyssey project, the satellite network. He's using Finch Global's core assets as collateral. Catherine knew about the Odyssey project. It was his obsession, his legacy project, the thing he and Crystal were always whispering about. It was wildly ambitious and incredibly risky. What does that mean for me? She asked. It means that the assets he's gambling with are legally about to become your assets, Abernathy explained. If he defaults, the creditors could seize control of the company. The timing of this is critical. You hold the trigger. The question is, when do you pull it? Catherine stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling Chicago streets. Alistair and Crystal saw her as a relic, a society wife playing with charities. They had no idea that her name, her legacy, was the very thing that gave them the power they so arrogantly wielded. She turned back to Abernathy, her eyes blazing with a cold fire he hadn't seen since her father was alive. Alistair is trying to have me removed from the board of the hospital foundation, she said. He told one of the other board members that my sentimental approach is hindering modern fundraising opportunities. He wants to install Crystal in my place. Abernathy's jaw tightened. An insult to your family's legacy. It's more than an insult, Catherine said. It's the perfect stage. He's going to call a special board meeting to vote me out. He thinks it will be his ultimate triumph, the final symbolic act of replacing me. He has no idea what's coming. She looked at the old lawyer, a true smile finally reaching her eyes. Howard, I want you to prepare everything. The filings, the injunctions, the ownership transfer, everything. I'll let Alistair call his meeting. I'll let him gather his allies. I want him and Crystal to be standing in the center of the room at the absolute peak of their arrogance. Her voice dropped to a near whisper laced with steel. And then we're not just going to take back the sandbox. We're going to demolish the castle. Alistair Finch felt invincible. The Odyssey project was coming together, a constellation of low-orbit satellites that would revolutionize global data transfer. It was his moonshot, his legacy. Crystal, ever the brilliant executor of his vision, had secured the final round of financing, a massive leveraged loan that used nearly every solid asset in Finch Global as collateral. It was a bet-the-company move, and Alistair had never felt more alive. With his future legacy secured, he turned his attention to tidying up the last relic of his past, Catherine. Her position as chair of the Children's Hospital Foundation was an annoyance. It gave her a platform, a sphere of influence that, while quaint in his eyes, still bore the respected Davenport name. Crystal, who craved the legitimacy that came with high society philanthropy, wanted the position for herself. For her, it was the final jewel in the crown of her conquest. For Alistair, it was a simple matter of house cleaning. He did it with his signature blend of corporate brutality and personal cruelty. He systematically called every member of the Foundation's board. To some, he spoke of modernizing, of leveraging the Foundation's assets for higher returns, painting Catherine as a well-meaning but hopelessly outdated manager. To others, he hinted at Catherine's fragile state, following their marital difficulties, suggesting she needed to be relieved of the pressure. He promised a massive personal donation from Finch Global to the Foundation the moment a more dynamic leadership was in place, a thinly veiled bribe. The special board meeting was set for a Wednesday afternoon in the hospital's oak-paneled boardroom. Alistair was humming as he adjusted his silk tie in the reflection of the elevator doors. Crystal stood beside him, radiating triumph in a sharp crimson power suit. "Are you nervous?" he asked her, a smirk playing on his lips. "Only that I might smile too much when they announce the vote," she purred, adjusting the lapel of his jacket. "She'll be so humiliated, in front of her own people. It's perfect." "She's had it coming," Alistair said, his voice hardening, holding on to that dusty old name like it still means something. Today they'll see that the only name that matters is Finch. When they entered the boardroom, the atmosphere was tense. The board members, a mix of old-money philanthropists and corporate heavyweights, were seated around the long mahogany table. Catherine was already there, seated at the head of the table, in her designated chair. She looked unnervingly calm, dressed in a simple but elegant cream-colored dress. She offered them a brief, unreadable nod. Beside her, to Alistair's surprise, sat Howard Abernathy. "What's he doing here?" Alistair muttered to Crystal. "Bringing her family lawyer for moral support. Pathetic." Catherine called the meeting to order, her voice clear and steady. "Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, Mr. Finch has called this extraordinary meeting to propose a change in the Foundation's leadership. Alistair, the floor is yours." Alistair stood radiating confidence. He launched into his pre-prepared speech, a masterful blend of feigned respect for Catherine's past contributions and a compelling vision for a more aggressive, financially driven future under new leadership. He barely looked at Catherine, addressing the board as if she were already a ghost. "And that is why, with a heavy heart but a clear vision for the future, I move for a vote of no confidence in the current chair," he concluded. "And I would like to formally nominate Ms. Crystal Vance, whose business acumen you all know, as the new chairwoman, effective immediately." Crystal gave a modest, predatory smile. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Board members shifted in their seats. They respected Catherine, but Alistair's power and his promised donation was a potent combination. Is there any discussion? Catherine asked, her gaze sweeping the table. No one spoke. They looked at their papers, at the ceiling, anywhere but at her. The betrayal was silent but absolute. Very well, Catherine said, her composure unshaken. Before we proceed to a vote, I have a brief statement of my own, or rather my legal counsel does, as it pertains to a significant financial matter that directly impacts this foundation and indeed everyone in this room with ties to Finch Global. She nodded to Abernathy. The old lawyer stood up slowly, placing a thick leather-bound folio on the table with a soft thud. Good afternoon. Abernathy began, his voice filling the room with an authority that had been absent from Alistair's slick presentation. This won't take long. I am here today on behalf of my client, Catherine Davenport Finch. As of 9:15 this morning, per the execution of Clause 11B of a pre-existing marital agreement, my client has assumed controlling ownership of several foundational holding companies, most notably Argent Allied Partners. Alistair stared, his confident smirk faltering. What the hell are you talking about? Argent Allied is a subsidiary of Finch Global. I'm afraid you have it backwards, Mr. Finch. Abernathy continued, his tone icy. Finch Global is for all intents and purposes a subsidiary of Argent Allied and its sister entities. Entities which, as of this morning, are under the sole control of Mrs. Finch. He let that statement hang in the air. A few of the board members who ran financial firms were beginning to look pale. They understood the implications immediately. Alistair let out a short, sharp laugh, though it sounded strained. This is absurd, a desperate fantasy. My lawyers will tear this apart in minutes. I invite them to try, Abernathy said calmly. We have also this morning filed an emergency injunction in Delaware Chancery Court. The injunction freezes all major financial activities of Finch Global pending an audit to determine the precise value of the assets that now belong to Mrs. Finch. He turned his gaze directly to Alistair. Specifically, it halts any further leveraging of company assets, for instance for something like the Odyssey project. The color drained from Alistair's face. The loan. The massive loan that was due to be drawn down tomorrow. Without it, the entire project would collapse and the default clauses would trigger. What is this? He stammered, his voice losing its booming confidence. What kind of trick is this, Catherine? Catherine finally looked at him. Her expression was not one of anger or hurt. It was one of utter detachment, as if she were examining an insect. It's no trick, Alistair, she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. It's just business. Something you were always so keen to teach me about. You see, you built your empire in a sandbox my father created for you. A guided venture, he called it. He wanted to see what you would do. And you did build something, but you forgot who owned the land it was built on. Crystal looked from Alistair to Catherine, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. Allie, what is she talking about? Alistair ignored her. He was locked in a battle of wills with his wife, the woman he had dismissed as a piece of furniture. And he was losing. You're lying, he hissed, his voice low and venomous. Abernathy slid a single piece of paper down the long table. It was a copy of the court-filed injunction. Alistair's name was on it. The Odyssey project was named explicitly. It was real. Now about the matter of this foundation, Catherine said, reclaiming control of the meeting. Alistair, your generous offer of a donation from Finch Global is of course now null and void, as you are no longer in a position to authorize it. In fact, given the company's uncertain future, I question whether you can afford your membership at the country club, let alone a multi-million-dollar gift. She looked around the table at the stunned board members. I believe Mr. Finch's motion is no longer relevant. Shall we move on to the actual business of this foundation? The plans for the new neonatal wing. Alistair Finch stood frozen, his world tilting on its axis. He and Crystal had walked in here for a coronation, a final humiliating victory. Instead, they had walked into an execution. And the woman they had mocked, the quiet antique wife, was not the one being executed. She was the one holding the axe. The aftermath of the boardroom ambush was not a loud explosion, but a series of swift, silent, devastating implosions. For Alistair Finch, the world he had meticulously built began to dissolve like sandcastles in an incoming tide. He and Crystal stumbled out of the hospital boardroom in a daze. His phone was already vibrating, a frantic series of calls from his chief financial officer, his legal team, and the consortium of banks backing the Odyssey project. "What was that, Allie?" Crystal demanded, her voice shrill with panic as they stood in the hospital's sterile white hallway. The crimson of her suit suddenly looked garish. "What did she mean, sandbox? You need to fix this." "Quiet!" he snapped, his mind racing. He saw Howard Abernathy exit the boardroom, give him a nod of finality that was almost pitying, and walk away. Catherine remained inside, her voice audible as she calmly discussed fundraising strategies with the now utterly compliant board. She hadn't even bothered to watch them leave. The first domino fell before he even reached his car. The lead banker for the Odyssey loan called. The conversation was brief and brutal. The injunction filed by Catherine's lawyers had spooked the entire syndicate. With questions of ownership and control over the collateral assets, Finch Global itself, the financing was indefinitely suspended. The billion-dollar project was dead in the water. When Alistair got back to his office, the atmosphere was one of controlled panic. His CFO, a man named Peterson, met him at the door, his face ashen. "The credit lines, Alistair," Peterson said, his voice low. "First National just called. They're calling our primary corporate credit line. They said something about a material adverse change in executive control." "They can't do that," Alistair roared. "They can," Peterson countered. "The covenant is tied to you maintaining majority control. Her injunction challenges that. Other banks are following suit. Our liquidity is evaporating. By the end of the day, we won't be able to make payroll." Crystal, who had followed him in, sank into a chair. The brilliant, ruthless executive was gone. In her place was a woman who was rapidly calculating her own exit strategy. The glamour of being a Titan's mistress faded quickly when the Titan was revealed to be a puppet. Her loyalty was to power and money, and both were draining from Alistair like blood from a fatal wound. "This is a legal maneuver, a bluff," Alistair said, trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. "My lawyers will crush it." But when he finally got his own high-priced legal team on a conference call, their tone was grim. They had reviewed the documents Catherine's team had forwarded. They were stunned. "The language in the prenup is incredibly precise, Alistair," said the lead attorney, a man known for his aggression now sounding deflated. "It's a Trojan horse. We never saw it. We were so focused on shielding future income we missed the clause about foundational assets. It's brilliant, actually." "So fix it," Alistair shouted into the speakerphone. "Fix it, Alistair. The evidence trail Abernathy has provided linking the funding of Argent Allied Partners directly to Augustus Davenport's estate is meticulous. Bank transfers, board minutes, signed affidavits. They have a perfect chain of custody. She doesn't just have a claim, she has a slam dunk." The second domino. His own legal eagles were admitting defeat. By mid-afternoon, the news had started to leak to the financial press. A vague story at first about a shareholder dispute and a leadership challenge at Finch Global. But the sharks in the water smelled blood. The company's stock, what little of it was publicly traded, began to plummet. His rivals, the ones he had crushed and gloated over, started circling, making inquiries about buying up Finch Global's debt for pennies on the dollar. Crystal watched the stock ticker on her computer screen, her face a stony mask. "The Arrow North deal is going to collapse," she said, her voice flat. "The financing was tied to our corporate credit, which no longer exists." Another domino. The deal she had been so proud of, the one they had used to mock Catherine at the gala, was turning to dust. The most painful blow came from their son, Leo. He was 17, a quiet, observant boy who had grown up in the shadow of his father's ambition. He had always been torn, loving his mother's warmth, but dazzled by his father's power and success. He called Alistair that evening. "Dad, I was with Mom this afternoon. Mr. Abernathy explained some of it," Leo said, his voice strained. "Is it true about Grandpa Davenport? Your mother is poisoning you against me, Leo." Alistair snarled. It's a lie. A complicated, vicious lie. Is it? Leo asked, and for the first time Alistair heard not a boy's confusion, but a young man's judgment in his voice. Because Mom showed me a copy of Grandpa's journal. His handwriting. I remember it. He wrote about building you a sandbox. He said he hoped you'd build something worthy of her. There was a painful pause. Did you... Click? Leo hung up. The personal domino. The one that cracked Alistair's soul. He sat alone in his vast office as dusk fell, the glittering city lights coming on outside his window. The view no longer looked like a kingdom. It looked like a world that was utterly indifferent to him. The calls had stopped. The panic had subsided into a dead-heavy silence. The door opened. It was Crystal. She was carrying her handbag and a small box containing the personal items from her desk. She didn't look at him. My lawyers will be in touch with yours, she said, her voice as cold and transactional as if they were discussing a failed acquisition. Regarding my severance package and my stock options. Alistair stared at her. My stock options, Crystal, there is no more company. It's over. The options were part of my employment contract, she said, unmoved. I'll take whatever they're worth, or I'll sue for wrongful termination. Goodbye, Alistair. She walked out without a backward glance. The ultimate betrayal so swift and passionless it was almost comical. She wasn't just leaving a sinking ship, she was stripping it for parts on her way out. Alistair Finch was finally completely alone. He had lost his company, his reputation, his mistress, and his son's respect all in the space of 8 hours. He leaned back in his ridiculously expensive ergonomic chair and looked at his reflection in the dark window. He saw not a titan, not a king, but a fool. A loud, arrogant man who had danced and preened on a stage he hadn't built, who had mocked the architect, and who was now standing in the ruins after she had quietly, calmly, and completely brought the entire theater down around him. The silence was absolute. The fall was complete. A week later, Alistair found himself summoned to a place he hadn't set foot in for years, the downtown offices of Abernathy & Cole. His own lawyers had advised him to go. It's not a negotiation, Alistair, they'd said. It's a surrender. Go listen and sign what they put in front of you. It's your only path to avoiding complete personal bankruptcy and a litany of shareholder lawsuits. He walked into the wood-paneled conference room feeling like a condemned man. The room felt heavy with the weight of history of a power he had never understood. Catherine was already there, seated at the head of the long table. She was not alone. Mr. Abernathy sat to her right, and to her left sat their son Leo. The boy wouldn't meet his father's eyes. Alistair took a seat opposite them, the polished mahogany surface between them feeling like a vast, unbridgeable chasm. He looked terrible. He hadn't slept. His expensive suit was rumpled, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a hollow, defeated glare. Alistair! Catherine began, her voice calm and measured. It held no triumph, no glee, only a profound and unsettling finality. Thank you for coming. We have some things to finalize. Mr. Abernathy slid a thick stack of documents across the table. This is a comprehensive settlement agreement, Alistair, the lawyer said. It outlines the transfer of all controlling interests in the foundational holding companies to Mrs. Finch. As a result, she now holds a 72% stake in what was formerly known as Finch Global. Alistair flinched at the phrase, what was formerly known. The company will be restructured and rebranded. Catherine continued, speaking directly to him for the first time. It will be taken private. I will be assuming the role of executive chairwoman. The name Finch will be removed from it entirely. Each word was a hammer blow dismantling the last bricks of his identity. The Odyssey project is canceled, she went on. The leveraged debt you took on has been renegotiated by Mr. Abernathy. We were able to avert total collapse, but the company's value is less than half of what it was 2 weeks ago. Your recklessness almost destroyed everything. My recklessness. Alistair finally found his voice, a ragged rasp. My genius built that company. Your father gave me a toy, and I turned it into an empire. You would have had nothing without me. It was Leo who responded. He looked up, his eyes filled with a sad disappointment that was far more wounding than hatred. "She would have had Grandpa's entire fortune, Dad," he said quietly. "What she has now is just the broken pieces of what you almost gambled away." Alistair stared at his son speechless. The boy he had dismissed, the son he had tried to dazzle with wealth and power, saw the truth with painful clarity. "As for your personal settlement," Abernathy interjected, bringing the focus back to the papers, "Catherine is being generous." Catherine spoke again. "The prenup you were so proud of gives me the right to leave you with nothing. It was designed to protect the company's assets, which are now legally mine. Your personal accounts have been frozen as they contain funds co-mingled from corporate accounts we now control." Alistair felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He was utterly at her mercy. "However," she said, "I have no desire to see the father of my son destitute. The penthouse, which is in my name as it was purchased with funds from my family trust, will be sold. You will be given 1 week to vacate and remove your personal belongings. From the proceeds of the sale, a trust will be established for you. It will provide you with an annual stipend of $60,000. $60,000. It was less than he used to spend on watches in a year. It was a clerical salary. It was a life of utter crushing mediocrity. It was in its own way a fate worse than poverty. It was irrelevance. "You'll be able to live comfortably, if not lavishly," Catherine stated, a clinical edge to her voice. "There is one condition." "A condition?" he repeated numbly. "You will sign a non-disclosure and a non-compete agreement of lifetime duration," Abernathy said. "You will never speak of the inner workings of Finch Global or the Davenport family. You will not work in or consult in the field of private equity or corporate finance anywhere in North America or Europe. You will, for all professional purposes, cease to exist." It was the final nail in the coffin. She wasn't just taking his money and his company. She was taking his name, his past, and his future. She was erasing him from the world he had fought so hard to conquer. He looked across the table at her, the woman he had called an antique, a relic. He saw no hint of the quiet, accommodating wife he had known. Her eyes were clear and hard as diamonds. She held all the cards, and she was playing them with a precision that would have made her father proud. He finally understood. He had mistaken her patience for weakness, her silence for submission, her grace for irrelevance. "And what about her?" Alistair asked, a last pathetic flicker of spite in his voice. "What about Crystal? Does she get a settlement too?" Catherine allowed herself the barest hint of a smile. It was cold, sharp, and utterly dismissive. Ms. Vance's employment was terminated for cause. As for her stock options, they were options on the stock of a company that is for all intents and purposes now worthless. Her contract is void. Mr. Abernathy received a call from her lawyer yesterday. Apparently she believes she has a claim for palimony. Catherine paused, letting the absurdity hang in the air. I believe Howard's exact response was, "Good luck with that." The final humiliating detail. Crystal the victor, the queen-in-waiting, was left with nothing but a worthless contract and a mountain of legal fees. Alistair looked down at the pen resting beside the stack of documents. There was nothing left to fight for. No angle to play. He was utterly comprehensively beaten. He had been so focused on the prize he never saw the trap it was sitting in. Slowly, his hand shaking, he picked up the pen. He began to sign page after page, signing away his empire, his identity, his life's work. With each stroke, he wasn't just signing a legal document. He was signing a confession to the greatest delusion of his life, the belief that he had ever, for one single moment, been the master of his own destiny. 1 year later, the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala was held once again in the same opulent hotel ballroom. The atmosphere, however, was different. A palpable buzz of energy and respect filled the room. The new Davenport-led era of the foundation was a resounding success. At the center of it all stood Catherine Davenport. She was not the chairwoman anymore. She had taken the title of president of the newly formed Davenport Philanthropic Group, which now managed all her family's charitable endeavors with the hospital as its crown jewel. She wore a stunning emerald green gown the color of new beginnings and, of course, money. Around her neck, she wore her grandmother's sapphire necklace. Tonight, it didn't look historical, it looked regal. She moved through the room not with the quiet endurance of the past, but with an easy, commanding confidence. People didn't greet her with pitying warmth. They approached her with deference, eager for a moment of her time. She was no longer Alistair Finch's wife. She was Catherine Davenport, the formidable head of a financial and philanthropic powerhouse. The restructured company, now named North Star Holdings, was leaner, more stable, and quietly respected. She had proven to be as shrewd and capable as her father, with an added layer of modern ethics he'd sometimes lacked. Leo stood beside her for much of the evening, handsome and composed in his first proper tuxedo. He was a freshman at the University of Chicago, studying economics. The tension and sadness had left his face replaced by a quiet pride as he watched his mother. He had spent the year watching her work, seeing her true strength, and he was in awe of her. Mr. Abernathy, now comfortably in a semi-retired advisory role, watched them from a nearby table, a satisfied smile on his face. He caught Catherine's eye and raised his glass in a silent toast. She returned it with a genuine, brilliant smile. The last laugh wasn't a single cackling moment of triumph. It was this. It was the sustained, quiet hum of a life reclaimed and a legacy secured. It was seeing her son proud, her family name honored, and her own capabilities realized. As Catherine was speaking with the mayor, she happened to glance towards the hotel entrance. A man was being politely but firmly turned away by security. He was arguing, gesticulating wildly. He was dressed in a cheap, ill-fitting suit. His face was puffy and his hair was unkempt. It took her a moment to recognize him. It was Alistair. He had apparently tried to crash the gala, perhaps hoping for a confrontation, a scene, a way to feel relevant again. But his name was not on any list. He was a nobody. He had no power here. The security guards, efficient and impassive, escorted him out into the cold Chicago night. No one in the ballroom even noticed. He was a ghost at a feast he had once hosted. Catherine watched for a moment, and for the first time she felt a sliver of something akin to pity. He was a man hollowed out, a king who had discovered his crown was made of cardboard. His entire identity had been a performance, and she had simply struck the set. She turned away back to her conversation, the brief interruption forgotten. Later that evening, a junior reporter from a society magazine approached her. "Mrs. Finch, I mean Ms. Davenport." The young woman stammered, "Everyone is saying you're the most powerful woman in Chicago. After everything that happened. Do you have any comment on your ex-husband?" Catherine considered the question for a moment. Her last laugh wasn't for him to hear. It wasn't about him at all anymore. It was for herself. She smiled serenely at the reporter. "Who?" she asked. The ultimate revenge wasn't ruin. It was irrelevance. And in that single dismissive word, Catherine Davenport finally and completely had the last laugh. And so Catherine Davenport's story comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always loud and aggressive. Sometimes it's the quiet patience, the deep-rooted intelligence, and the underestimated grace of a person who knows their own worth, even when others try to devalue it. Alistair and Crystal made the fatal mistake of judging a book by its cover, never bothering to read the story of legacy and power written in its pages. They learned the hard way that you should never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate move? Was it pure genius or cold-hearted revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. A man's home is his castle, but for tech millionaire Arthur Pembroke, his multi-million-dollar mansion was a fortress. After his free-spirited wife, Genevieve, vanished without a trace, he did what any man of logic and means would do. He hardened his defenses. He changed every lock, upgraded every sensor, and sealed his life off from the woman he believed had abandoned him. But just days later, in the dead of night, his impenetrable security system detected a ghost. a single silent alert from a place he never thought to check, the attic. What followed was not a search for a missing person, but the terrifying unraveling of a marriage, a man's sanity, and the unthinkable truth that was hiding right above his head. The Pembroke estate in Atherton, California wasn't a home. It was a statement. A sprawling testament to Arthur Pembroke's genius carved from glass steel and muted Italian marble. It was a place of straight lines, precise angles, and automated everything from the curtains that silently greeted the dawn to the security system that monitored the perimeter with the unblinking eye of a predator. Arthur, the architect of a billion-dollar data analytics empire, had designed his life with the same meticulous, ruthless efficiency. Everything had a place, a purpose, a quantifiable value. Everything, that is, except his wife Genevieve. Genevieve was the one variable Arthur could never quite solve. Where he was logic, she was art. Where he saw data points, she saw color and chaos. Her art studio, the one concession to disorder he allowed in the house, was a vibrant explosion of half-finished canvases, clay-spattered floors, and the sharp, intoxicating scent of turpentine. She was a whirlwind of emotion in his sterile world, a splash of reckless crimson on his monochrome palette. For 7 years, this opposition had been the source of their attraction. Now it was the chasm between them. The argument, the one that would precede the silence, was about something as trivial and as profound as a gala. The Prometheus Initiative Gala. A night for Silicon Valley royalty to congratulate themselves on their philanthropy. "It's non-negotiable, Jen," Arthur had said, not looking up from the tablet that was a permanent extension of his hand. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking a garden so perfectly manicured it looked like a computer rendering. "My name is on the sponsorship list. Our presence is required." Genevieve was by the fireplace, its gas-powered flames dancing prettily, but offering no real warmth. She was twisting a silver ring on her finger, a habit she had when she felt cornered. "Your name, Arthur, not ours. I'm just the handbag, the wife accessory you trot out to prove you have a human side." "That's absurd," he clipped, finally looking at her. His gaze was sharp, analytical. He wasn't hearing her feelings. He was parsing her statement for logical fallacies. "Our partnership is a strategic asset." "A strategic asset?" She repeated the words, tasting like poison. "Is that what we are? Did you run the numbers on our marriage? Calculate the ROI on my love?" "Don't be dramatic. This is about maintaining the image that affords you your hobby." He gestured vaguely in the direction of her studio. It was the wrong thing to say. He knew it the moment the words left his lips. He saw the light in her vibrant green eyes flicker and die. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just went still, a terrifying, absolute stillness. "You're right," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "It's a very expensive hobby." She turned and walked out of the room. Arthur, assuming this was merely a temporary ceasefire, went back to his tablet. He expected her to reappear in an hour, perhaps with a sarcastic apology that they would both pretend was sincere. He expected the familiar rhythm of their conflict and resolution. But the hour passed. Then 2. When dinner time came, the automated kitchen had prepared his usual meal of grilled salmon and asparagus, but the place setting across from him remained empty. He ate alone in the cavernous dining hall, the silence broken only by the click of his fork on the plate. He called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. He sent a text. "This is childish. Come down." No reply. By 10 p.m., annoyance had curdled into a strange, unfamiliar unease. He walked through the house. Her studio was dark. Her car, a vintage convertible she adored, was still in the garage. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, her keys beside it. Her phone, he discovered, was lying on her bedside table. She had left with nothing. He told himself she'd gone for a walk to clear her head, that she was at her friend Bianca's house venting. But as midnight crept in, painting long distorted shadows across the marble floors, a colder, more pragmatic thought took root. She had left. Not just the room, but him. The ultimate illogical act of defiance. Arthur Pembroke did not panic. Panic was an inefficient emotion. Instead, he initiated a protocol. The next morning, he didn't call the police. He called his lawyer. "My wife has left." He stated, his voice as flat as a dial tone. "I want to understand the preliminary steps for asset protection. I assume she'll make a claim." Then he called a man named Dimitri, a private security contractor whose entire business was discretion and impenetrable systems. "Dimitri," Arthur said, pacing his office, "I need a complete system overhaul at the residence. Every lock digital and physical. New access codes for all staff. I want it done by sundown." "Is there a specific threat, Mr. Pembroke?" Dimitri asked. "The threat is ambiguity," Arthur replied. "I'm eliminating it." That afternoon, a team of quiet, efficient men descended upon the estate. They replaced the locks on the towering front doors, the service entrances, the French doors leading to the garden, and even the lock on the door to Genevieve's studio. By dusk, the Pembroke estate was more fortress than ever. Arthur stood in the center of his silent home, the new master key card feeling heavy and cold in his hand. He felt a sense of control return. He had identified a vulnerability in his life, and he had patched it. He believed he was now secure. He was locking her out. He never considered for a single moment that he might be locking her in. 3 days of silence passed. Arthur moved through his life with chilling precision. He attended the Prometheus Gala alone, offering a terse and practiced explanation for his wife's absence. "Genevieve is feeling under the weather. A sudden bug." He networked, he smiled, he drank precisely 2 glasses of champagne, and he left at exactly 10:30 p.m. To any observer, he was the picture of a man in control. But inside the glass fortress, the silence was beginning to change. It was no longer a peaceful absence of sound, but a heavy, presence-filled void. The house felt vast and empty, its automated systems humming like a mechanical ghost. Genevieve's best friend, a fiery art gallery owner named Bianca, was the first to officially sound the alarm. She bombarded Arthur's phone with calls and texts. "Arthur, where is she? She missed our lunch. She's not answering. This isn't like her." "She needed some space," Arthur replied via text, refusing to speak with her directly. "Space Gen doesn't do space without a 10-page manifesto and a bottle of wine. I'm coming over." When Bianca arrived, she was met by the new, unyielding reality of the estate. The intercom buzzed, and Arthur's disembodied voice was the only welcome she received. "She's not here, Bianca." "Then let me in. Let me see her studio. Maybe she left a note." "I've looked. There's nothing. I'll let you know if I hear from her." The intercom clicked off. Bianca, enraged and terrified, did what Arthur had failed to do. She called the Atherton Police Department. The arrival of Detective Cade Harding was an unwelcome intrusion into Arthur's sanitized world. Harding was a man who looked like he'd been carved from weathered oak. He was in his late 50s, with eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by wealth or technology. He moved with a slow, deliberate pace that Arthur found infuriating. They sat in the living room, the detective refusing the offer of sparkling water. "So, Mr. Pembroke," Harding began, his voice a low gravel, "your wife Genevieve has been missing for 4 days now, but you didn't report it. Her friend did. Why is that?" "I didn't believe her to be missing," Arthur stated, his posture rigid. "I believed she had left me. I was respecting her decision." "Respecting it or accepting it?" "Big difference," Harding mused, looking around the room. "You two have an argument Tuesday night. A disagreement. About a social obligation. Bianca, her friend, said she was very upset. Said you two had been fighting a lot lately. About her feeling—" what was the word she used? Ornamental. Arthur's jaw tightened. Bianca is prone to drama. Genevieve was emotional. Our marriage was not without its complexities, but it was stable. So stable that you had all the locks changed the day after she took some space, Harding asked, his gaze unwavering. That seems fast, almost like you were erasing her. It was a security measure. Arthur countered the logic, feeling flimsy even to him now. An open-ended departure creates a security vulnerability. My work requires absolute discretion and safety. Right. Your work, Harding said, a hint of skepticism in his tone. He stood up and walked towards the fireplace. Mind if I look around her studio, maybe? Arthur reluctantly led him to Genevieve's studio. The door, which had once been adorned with paint smudges and streaks of color, was now pristine. The new lock gleamed under the track lighting. Inside, the chaos was contained. Everything was exactly as she had left it. A canvas on an easel depicted a beautiful, intricate bird with shimmering feathers trapped inside a cage made of what looked like computer code. Harding stared at it for a long moment. Tells a story, doesn't it? The detective murmured. The official investigation began. Harding and his team were thorough. They interviewed the staff, all of whom had been given new access cards and instructions not to speak about the Pembrokes' private life. They spoke to Bianca, who painted a picture of a vibrant woman slowly being suffocated by a loveless transactional marriage. They spoke to Arthur's sister Audrey, a sharp-tongued woman who had never warmed to Genevieve. Let's be honest, detective, Audrey had said over the phone from her home in Boston. Genevieve was a lovely girl, but she was a dreamer. Arthur built an empire. They were speaking different languages. I'm surprised it lasted this long. He's better off, frankly. Less distraction. The detectives found no evidence of foul play. No signs of a struggle. Genevieve's bank accounts were untouched. Her credit cards were unused. Her passport was in the safe. The narrative solidified. Genevieve Pembroke, an unhappy wife, had walked away from her gilded cage with nothing but the clothes on her back, seeking a new life, free from her controlling husband. The media caught wind of the story. Tech mogul's wife vanishes. Arthur's carefully constructed image began to crack. He was portrayed as a cold, unfeeling automaton, a man who changed the locks before he shed a tear. The public narrative was a conviction in itself. Arthur retreated deeper into his fortress, his frustration mounting. He was a man who solved problems. This was a problem he couldn't solve with money or code. The police were useless. The media was a pack of jackals. He was alone, surrounded by the ghost of his wife, her absence a screaming indictment. He felt a rage he hadn't felt in years, a rage at her for creating this chaos, for making him the villain in a story he didn't write. The house was secure, but his world was falling apart. It happened on the 8th night of her absence. The house was tomb silent. Arthur was in his office, a sanctuary of glowing screens and humming servers, trying to lose himself in lines of code. Sleep had become a foreign country he could no longer visit. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the unfinished painting in her studio, the bird in the digital cage. At 2:17 a.m., a notification pinged on his central control panel, a small, discrete sound he had programmed himself. It was not the jarring alarm of a perimeter breach, but a low-priority internal alert. He glanced at it, annoyed at the distraction. Alert motion detected. Zone attic. Sensor M7. Arthur stared at the screen. The attic. It was impossible. The attic was a dead space, a repository for forgotten things, old furniture from the previous owner's seasonal decorations, they never used, boxes of his old academic papers. It was sealed, locked, and fortified like every other part of the house. The motion sensor up there, M7, was an old one, part of the original system he'd kept on the grid more for the sake of completion than actual security. His first thought was a malfunction. A glitch. A rat. He was a man of logic. He ran a diagnostic on the sensor. Status M7. Okay. Voltage normal. Connectivity stable. The system insisted it was working perfectly. Another ping. Alert motion detected. Zone attic. Sensor M7. A cold dread, utterly illogical and deeply unsettling, trickled down his spine. A rat wouldn't trigger the sensor twice in such a short span. The sensors were calibrated to detect heat signatures and mass above a certain threshold specifically to avoid false alarms from rodents. He pulled up the architectural schematic of the house on one of his monitors, zooming in on the third floor. The attic spanned the entire length of the main wing. Access was through a single drop-down ladder in the ceiling of the second-floor hallway, a hallway he hadn't walked down in months. He got up, his movement stiff. The silence of the house seemed to press in on him as he left the humming sanctuary of his office. He walked up the floating glass staircase to the second floor. The hallway was dark, the motion-activated lights casting pools of sterile white light at his feet as he moved. He stood directly below the access panel in the ceiling. It was a faint white square, seamless and unobtrusive. There was a key for the panel lock, a simple old-fashioned metal key that was kept in a security box in his office. He hadn't touched it since they moved in. He told himself this was ridiculous. It was a spider building a web over the sensor lens. It was a draft. But he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The absolute certainty that he was not alone in his impenetrable fortress. He went back to his office, retrieved the key, and returned to the hallway. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic, disorderly rhythm that offended his sense of control. His hand was slick with sweat as he inserted the key into the nearly invisible lock on the panel. He turned the key. With a soft click, the lock disengaged. A folding ladder was attached to the door. He pulled it down, its metal sections unfolding with a series of loud, echoing clanks that sounded like gunshots in the dead quiet. He paused, listening. There was nothing. Just the whisper of the air conditioning. Dust motes danced in the beam of his phone's flashlight as he pointed it up into the dark maw of the attic. The air that wafted down was stale and thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten time. "Hello!" he called out, his voice sounding thin and foreign. The silence that answered was absolute. Steeling himself, he began to climb the metal rungs cold beneath his hands. His head and shoulders emerged into the darkness. He swept the flashlight beam across the space. It was exactly as he remembered it, only bigger and more menacing in the dark. A vast, shadowy expanse under the high-peaked roof filled with shapes draped in white dust cloths, looking like a congregation of ghosts. Boxes were stacked against the far wall. The floor was covered in a thick layer of undisturbed dust. Undisturbed. He swept the light across the floorboards again, more carefully this time. And there it was. In the thick gray dust, faint but unmistakable, were scuff marks. Not footprints, but the marks of something being dragged. And near the center of the room, directly under the M7 sensor mounted on a roof beam, the dust was slightly disturbed, smudged, as if someone had been standing there. Recently, a cold wave washed over him. He scanned the entire space again. The rafters, the corners, behind the shrouded furniture. Nothing. No one. He retreated back down the ladder, his mind racing, trying to fit this new impossible data into a logical framework. An intruder. How they would have had to bypass the perimeter alarm, somehow get to the second floor undetected, and pick the specialized lock on the attic panel. It made no sense. A homeless person. A squatter in Atherton. In his house, he pushed the ladder back up the panel ceiling with a solid thud. He locked it and returned to his office, the image of the smudged dust burned into his brain. He sat in front of his monitors, but he wasn't looking at code anymore. He was staring at the small green icon for sensor M7. It was dormant, quiescent, but he knew it was lying. That night, Arthur Pembroke did not sleep at all. He sat in the dark, watching the monitor, waiting for the ghost in his machine to move again. The fortress was no longer a refuge. It was a trap, and he was inside it with something he couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't control. The days that followed were a slow-motion collapse of Arthur's psyche. The man who lived by data and predictable outcomes was now haunted by a single erratic variable, the motion sensor in his attic. It would go off at random, maddening intervals, sometimes twice in an hour, followed by a full day of silence. Once it pinged relentlessly every 15 minutes between 3:00 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., a systematic torment that felt almost deliberate. Each time, Arthur would check the attic. He installed a high-resolution low-light camera pointed directly at the spot beneath the sensor. But the footage showed nothing, just an empty, dusty space. He would climb the ladder, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and find nothing but the same faint smudges in the dust, perhaps a fraction more pronounced than before. He started talking to himself. "It's the wiring," he'd mutter, pacing his office. "The temperature fluctuations are causing the passive infrared sensor to misfire." He spent an entire day researching the sensor's technical specifications, trying to find a logical explanation. He convinced himself it was a faulty unit and ordered a new one. Dmitri, the security contractor, came to install it. He was a broad, impassive man who never asked questions. "You want a new sensor for the attic, Mr. Pembroke? No problem. And run a full diagnostic on the entire Zone 7 loop," Arthur commanded. "Check for shorts, for power surges, anything." Dimitri's report came back an hour later. "System is clean, Mr. Pembroke. The old sensor passed all diagnostics, but the new one is in, top of the line. Won't get a false positive from a hummingbird's fart." That night at 1:48 a.m. the new sensor went off. Alert motion detected. Zone attic, sensor M7B. Arthur felt a tremor of genuine fear. This wasn't a glitch. It was real. Something was up there. Something that was smart enough to evade a camera. His obsession became all-consuming. His multi-billion-dollar company, the monument to his intellect, began to suffer. He missed virtual board meetings. His replies to urgent emails became terse and nonsensical. He spent hours, days, staring at the security feed from the attic camera, his eyes burning, looking for a shadow that wasn't there. A flicker of movement the sensor could see, but the camera couldn't. He started hearing things. A soft creak of a floorboard from above when the house was supposed to be silent. A faint whisper-like sound that could have been the wind but wasn't. He was living on black coffee and a gnawing paranoia. He lost weight. His tailored suits hung loosely on his frame. Dark circles pooled under his eyes, making him look like a haunted man. His sister Audrey called, her voice sharp with concern. "Arthur, I spoke to your CFO. He said you're completely disengaged. What is going on? Is this about Genevieve?" "I'm handling it." Arthur snapped, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Handling it? You sound terrible. People are talking. They're saying you've lost it, that the stress of her leaving has broken you." "I have not broken," he roared, slamming his hand on his desk. He looked at the monitor displaying the attic feed. Empty, silent, mocking him. "I'm just working through a complex problem." Detective Harding called for an update, his voice laced with professional pity. "Mr. Pembroke, we've exhausted all our leads. No financial activity, no contact with friends. The consensus is she's gone off-grid. We're scaling back the active search. Of course, the case remains open." "You're giving up," Arthur said, the words flat. "We're prioritizing resources," Harding corrected gently. "Unless some new evidence comes to light. Is there anything, Mr. Pembroke?" "Anything at all you haven't told us?" Arthur thought of the sensor alerts, of the sounds. He opened his mouth to tell him, but stopped. What would he say? That his house was haunted, that a ghost was triggering his state-of-the-art security system. They already thought he was a cold-hearted eccentric on the verge of a breakdown. This would confirm it. They might even think he was fabricating it to distract from his own potential involvement. "No, detective," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "Nothing new." The worst part was the doubt. He would stand in the stark minimalist kitchen in the middle of the night, the silence of the house pressing down on him, and wonder if it was all in his head. Was this what grief was? A phantom limb, an ache for a person who was gone. Was his mind, his most prized asset, betraying him, creating a mystery to distract from the simple, painful truth that his wife had found him so unbearable she had vanished into thin air? He set up audio recorders in the attic. Tiny voice-activated devices hidden in the corners. For 2 days they recorded nothing but silence. Then on the third night he played back the recording and heard it. It was faint, almost imperceptible beneath the low hum of the house's ventilation system, but it was there. A sound. A soft, choked sob. It lasted only a second, but it was undeniably human. Arthur felt the floor drop out from under him. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't his imagination. It was a person. A person hiding in his attic for almost 2 weeks. A person who was crying. The possibilities crashed through his mind, each more terrifying than the last. A deranged stalker. A meticulous thief waiting for the right moment to strike. But how did they get in? And how had they survived for so long? There was no food up there. No water. He replayed the sound of the sob again and again, turning the volume up, filtering out the background noise. It was a sound of profound despair. And beneath the despair there was something else. Something horribly, terrifyingly familiar. He froze, his hand trembling on the mouse. He closed his eyes, focusing only on the sound. The pitch. The cadence of the breath. He knew that sob. He had heard it once before, years ago, when Genevieve's mother had passed away. It was the sound of her heart breaking. It couldn't be. His mind rebelled against the notion. It was a logical impossibility, a madness. She was gone. Her car was here, her phone, her purse. She had walked out. The police believed it. Her friends believed it. He believed it. But the sound was Genevieve. His entire reality tilted on its axis. If it was her, why? Why would she hide in the dusty, dark attic of the very house she was so desperate to escape? Why would she subject herself to that? And then a colder, more horrifying thought pierced through his confusion. He had changed the locks the day after she disappeared. He had sealed the house. The attic access was a drop-down ladder from the inside. There was no other way in or out. If she had gone up there the night they argued, perhaps to hide, perhaps to think, and he had locked the house down. She wasn't hiding. She was trapped. Trapped by him. For 13 days. In the dark. With no food, no water, listening to him move about his life below. The sob wasn't just despair. It was the sound of someone giving up. The orderly, precise world of Arthur Pembroke shattered into a million pieces. He wasn't the victim of a mysterious disappearance. He was a monster. He was a jailer who didn't even know he had a prisoner. The realization was a physical blow. Arthur staggered back from his desk, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. He saw the last 2 weeks through a new horrific lens, his coldness, his immediate call to his lawyer, his order to change the locks. He had acted not like a concerned husband, but like a man sealing a tomb. Genevieve. Trapped. Listening. He pictured her huddled in the dark, hearing the security team moving through the house, the clicks of the new lock slotting into place, sealing her fate. Hearing him leave for the gala. Hearing him eat his solitary meals. Hearing her friend Bianca plead at the intercom, only to be turned away by his cold, disembodied voice. The motion sensor alerts weren't a ghost. They were a desperate cry for help. The scuff marks in the dust were from her growing weaker, trying to get his attention. The sob he had recorded was the sound of her hope finally dying. How was she even alive? Humans could survive weeks without food, but only days without water. His mind, now frantic and desperate for a solution rather than an explanation, seized on a single detail of the house's architecture. The attic had old copper piping running through it, part of the original plumbing for the house before its modern renovation. On humid nights, condensation would form on those pipes. It wouldn't be much, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was enough. He had to go up there. Now. But how? If he stormed up shouting her name, he might frighten her to death. She was likely weak, terrified, and in a fragile mental state. He had to be careful. He went to the kitchen, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He filled a large bottle with water and grabbed a handful of protein bars from the pantry. He found a blanket in a linen closet. It felt like a pitifully small offering for the horrors he had inflicted. He returned to the second-floor hallway, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He pulled down the ladder, the metallic clatter sounding like an accusation in the silent house. This time he didn't call out. He just started climbing the supplies clutched in one hand. As his head rose into the attic space, the beam of his powerful flashlight cut a wide, bright path through the oppressive darkness. He swept it across the familiar scene of shrouded furniture and stacked boxes. "Jen," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Genevieve, are you here? It's me. It's Arthur." Silence. The thick, dead silence of a place that holds a terrible secret. He pulled himself all the way into the attic, placing the water and food gently on the dusty floorboards. "Jen, please. I know you're here. I heard you. I am so sorry." He moved slowly, deliberately, sweeping the light into every corner, behind every shape. He was terrified of what he might find. And then he saw it. Behind a large, cloth-draped armoire from a bygone era, he saw a small collection of objects that did not belong. He moved closer, his breath catching in his throat. There was a small, grimy jam jar holding perhaps an inch of murky water. He looked up and saw where it had come from, a slow, steady drip of condensation from an old copper pipe directly above. It was her water source. Beside it lay a small, antique wooden box. It was her mother's jewelry box, though he knew she kept nothing of value in it anymore. Just old letters, photographs, sentimental trifles. This must be what she came for the night she disappeared. She had come to retrieve the one thing that was purely hers, a link to a life before him, before the gilded cage. And then he saw the nest. In a small alcove between two stacks of boxes, she had pulled down several of the dusty cloths from the furniture and fashioned a makeshift bed. It was a pathetic, heartbreaking sight. On the floor beside the nest of cloths was a piece of splintered floorboard. On its surface, something had been scratched over and over with a nail or a sharp rock. It was a calendar, 13 vertical lines with the 14th started but unfinished. He was standing in her prison cell, a cell he had created. He swept the light around the nest one more time, and it fell upon a small notebook open to a page filled with faint, spidery handwriting. It was one of his old engineering notebooks she must have found in a box. He picked it up with a trembling hand. The writing was weak, the sentences fragmented. It was her diary of captivity. Day 3. The locks. I heard them. Click, click, click. All day. Dimitri's voice. Arthur told him to change everything. He thinks I left. He didn't even look for me. He just deleted me. Day 5. So thirsty. The pipes sweat at night. Taste like metal and dust. Better than nothing. I heard Bianca at the door. I wanted to scream, but I was too weak and too afraid. What would he do if he found me day 8? The sensor. I saw the little red light blink when I stood under it. Maybe he will see. Maybe the machine will tell him I am here. The machine is the only thing he listens to. Day 11. He came up. I hid behind the chest. I held my breath until my lungs burned. He pointed his light everywhere. He didn't see me. He left. He locked it. He didn't even know he locked it. Day 13. I don't know how much longer. It's so cold. I think of the sun. I heard him laugh downstairs. He was on the phone. A business call. A sound from another world. My world is this dust and this darkness. Arthur dropped the notebook as if it were on fire. The words were a knife in his gut. The cold, calculated man who had sealed his house had laughed on a business call while his wife was dying of thirst and despair just a few feet above his head. The sheer scale of his failure, not as a provider, but as a human being, crashed down on him. He had been so obsessed with the what and the how of the mystery he had never once considered the why. He fell to his knees in the dust, the flashlight rolling away its beam pointing at the ceiling like a lonely spotlight. He was in the center of the nest she had made, surrounded by the evidence of her suffering. He still hadn't found her, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that she was close. She was watching him right now. He felt her eyes on him from the shadows. She had seen him discover her world. She had seen him read her words. The next move was his. Arthur remained on his knees for what felt like an eternity, the dust and the silence of the attic pressing down on him. The knowledge of her presence was a palpable thing, a static charge in the air. She was here, watching, waiting. He was the intruder in her desperate sanctuary. His first instinct, the old Arthur instinct, was to solve the problem. Find her, bring her downstairs, call a doctor. A logical sequence of events. But the man who had read that notebook knew that logic was the weapon that had created this nightmare. This required something else. Something he had long ago buried: vulnerability. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the dusty air scraping his raw throat. He did not get up. He did not shine his light into the dark corners where she was surely hiding. Instead, he began to speak to the oppressive darkness, his voice low and broken. "Jen." He started, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not going to look for you. I won't hunt you in your own home. You can stay hidden. But I need to say this, and I need you to hear it." He paused, gathering the words that felt so foreign on his tongue. "When you disappeared, my first thought wasn't for your safety. It was for my security, my control. You became a problem to be managed, a loose end. I called my lawyer before I even considered calling your friends. I changed the locks. God, the locks." He choked on the word, the sound of his own shame echoing in the vast space. "I locked you in here. I know that now. I didn't mean to, but that doesn't matter. It's what I did. I was so arrogant, so certain you had just run off from the man who buys you everything you could ever want. I never once stopped to think about what I wasn't giving you." He shifted on his knees, the movement loud in the stillness. He looked down at his hands, the hands that built an empire but couldn't hold a marriage together. "I remember when we first met," he continued, his voice softer now, lost in memory. "At that ridiculous gallery opening, you were arguing with the artist about his use of color theory. You were so alive, so passionate. You didn't care that I was Arthur Pembroke. You just saw a guy in a boring suit who didn't understand art. You made me feel real, not like a brand or a name on a building. And then I tried to make you fit into my world. I put you in this house, this mausoleum. I thought giving you the studio was enough, a designated space for your hobby, as I so cruelly called it. I turned you into an asset, a beautiful object to be displayed at galas. The bird in the cage," he murmured, finally understanding the painting downstairs. "You were painting your own portrait, weren't you? And I was too blind to see it." He looked towards the makeshift bed, the pathetic collection of cloths. "These last 2 weeks, while you were up here fighting to survive on drops of water, I was downstairs being angry at you. I was angry that you had disrupted my perfect orderly life. I was the victim in my own head. The narcissism of it. It's breathtaking." He fell silent. He had laid his soul bare to the shadows. He had offered no excuses, only a full and complete confession of his failings. Now the silence that answered was different. It was charged, waiting. For a full minute, nothing happened. Arthur began to fear he had been wrong, that she had somehow slipped away, or that she was too weak to respond, or worse, that she had heard him and had judged him unworthy of an answer. Then from the deepest, darkest corner of the attic behind a stack of old shipping crates came a sound. A faint rustling scrape. Arthur held his breath. He didn't move a muscle. Slowly, a figure emerged from the blackness. It was a silhouette at first, frail and unsteady. As she stepped into the periphery of the flashlight's beam, his heart broke. It was Genevieve, but a version of her he had never seen. She was gaunt, her face pale and smudged with dirt, her clothes hanging off her skeletal frame. Her vibrant green eyes, usually so full of life, were huge in her thin face, sunken and filled with a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and a lifetime of unshed tears. She leaned against a wooden beam for support, her legs trembling. They stared at each other across the dusty expanse. The millionaire and the prisoner, the jailer and his wife. "I didn't plan this," she whispered, her voice a dry, raspy thing unused for days. "I came up here, that night, to get my mother's box. I was going to leave Arthur. I was really going to go." She took a shaky step forward. "I heard you come home. I was going to wait for you to go to bed and then slip out. But then, the next day, the noise, the men, the locks. You were so quick, so cold. You didn't even seem sad, just annoyed. And I realized leaving wasn't enough. You wouldn't have understood why. You would have just moved on, patched the vulnerability." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of the old fire in her eyes. "So I stayed. I wanted to see. I wanted to watch the great Arthur Pembroke when he thought no one was looking. I wanted to know if you would ever miss me, or just the idea of me." "I missed you," he said, the truth of it hitting him with the force of a physical impact. "I was just too proud and too stupid to admit it." She took another step, her eyes fixed on the bottle of water he had set on the floor. Her thirst was a visible thing, a primal need. Arthur pushed it gently across the dusty floorboards toward her. She stumbled forward, fell to her knees, and grabbed the bottle with trembling hands. She twisted the cap with difficulty and brought it to her lips, drinking deeply, water spilling down her chin and onto her dirty shirt. The sound was raw, elemental. After a long moment, she lowered the bottle, gasping for air. She looked at him, her eyes clearer now, the immediate fog of dehydration lifting. "What now, Arthur?" she rasped. He had no algorithm for this, no flowchart. For the first time in his adult life, he had no idea what the next step was. And for the first time, that felt right. "First," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we get you out of here. We get you help. And then, we talk. For real this time. No strategies. No assets. Just truth." She watched him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. She saw the brokenness there, the shattered pride. She saw the man she had once fallen in love with emerging from the wreckage of the mogul he had become. Slowly she nodded. Arthur rose and walked towards her, his steps hesitant. He knelt in front of her, and with a gentleness he didn't know he possessed, he reached out and brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek. She flinched at the contact, then ever so slightly leaned into his touch. In the dusty, forgotten attic of their perfect house, surrounded by the ghosts of their failed marriage, a fragile, terrifying new beginning was born. The descent from the attic was a slow, surreal affair. Arthur supported Genevieve's frail body, her arm draped over his shoulder, her feet shuffling weakly on the ladder's rungs. Every step down was a step into a new, uncertain reality. The harsh, sterile light of the second-floor hallway seemed to blind them both. He didn't call an ambulance. He knew instinctively that this could not become a public spectacle. This was their private cataclysm. He called his personal physician, Dr. Alistair Finch, a man who owed his discreet practice to the patronage of Silicon Valley's most secretive figures. "Alistair," Arthur said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I need you at my house. Now, no questions. The highest level of discretion is required." While they waited, Arthur led Genevieve to their master suite, a room she hadn't slept in for over 2 weeks. He ran a bath for her, and she didn't protest sinking into the warm water, with a sigh that seemed to release years of tension. While she bathed, Arthur threw away the untouched salmon and asparagus that the kitchen had prepared for his dinner. He made her toast the simplest of foods, and she ate it slowly like someone learning to taste again. Dr. Finch arrived and was a paragon of professional calm. He assessed Genevieve with gentle hands, his face betraying nothing: dehydration, malnutrition, extreme exhaustion, and shock. He administered an IV drip, his movements efficient. He asked no questions about the circumstances, treating it as he would any other medical emergency. But his eyes, when they briefly met Arthur's, held a deep, unspoken gravity. For the next few days, the house became a convalescent ward. Genevieve slept mostly, a deep, profound sleep that was both healing and an escape. Arthur watched over her, canceling every meeting, ignoring every demand from his empire. He sat in a chair by her bed, not working, not reading, just watching her breathe. In her sleep, her face lost its haunted look, and he could see glimpses of the woman he had married. When she was awake, they spoke. Not about the attic, not yet. They spoke of small things: the weather, a book she had wanted to read. He told her about a ridiculous bug in a new piece of software, and for the first time in years she laughed, a small, weak sound that was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. Bianca was the first person they told. She arrived, her face a mask of fury and fear, ready to tear Arthur limb from limb. But when she saw Genevieve, pale but safe, her anger dissolved into tears. She hugged her friend, rocking her gently. She shot Arthur a look that could have melted steel, but she said nothing, recognizing that the situation was far beyond simple condemnation. The reckoning came a week later. They sat in the garden, the California sun warm on their faces. Genevieve was stronger, wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket. "I need to leave this house, Arthur," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I can't heal in the place that was my prison." Arthur nodded. He had known this was coming. "I know. I've already made some calls. I'm selling it." Genevieve looked at him, surprised. "Selling it? But it's your masterpiece." "It's a failed experiment," he replied, looking at the sharp, unforgiving lines of the glass structure. "It's a monument to control. And control almost killed you. I don't want to live in it anymore." She was going to stay with Bianca. They decided on a trial separation, a word that felt both clinical and terrifyingly real. There were no discussions of lawyers or assets this time. Just space, time. Their last conversation before she left took place in her studio. The painting of the bird in the digital cage was still on the easel. "Why didn't you scream?" He asked the question that had tormented him. "When you heard me up there, why didn't you just make a sound?" She looked at him, her eyes full of a sad wisdom. "Because I wasn't sure which version of you would find me, Arthur. The man I married, or the man who changes the locks. I had to wait and see who would come looking, the jailer or the husband." He had no response to that. It was the unvarnished, brutal truth. Genevieve left that afternoon. The silence that descended on the house was different this time. It wasn't the heavy, accusatory silence of her absence, but a lighter, more contemplative quiet. It was the silence of a blank page. Over the next few months, Arthur dismantled his old life with the same efficiency he had used to build it. He sold the house. He stepped down as CEO of his company, taking on a less demanding role as a board chairman. He sold the sports cars and the automated gadgets. He and Genevieve started therapy both individually and together. The sessions were brutal, excavating years of misunderstandings, resentments, and the slow creeping loneliness that had defined their marriage. He learned about the suffocating weight of his expectations. She learned to give voice to her needs before they became a desperate, silent protest. Their future was an unwritten design. There was no guarantee they would get back together. The damage was deep, the trauma real. But for the first time they were building something together, not with steel and glass, but with fragile, honest words. One day, Arthur visited Genevieve at Bianca's apartment. He brought no flowers, no expensive gifts. He brought a single, simple sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils. "I thought, maybe you'd want to design something new," he said, holding it out to her. She took it, her fingers brushing his. She smiled a real, genuine smile. Not the one for the galas, but the one he remembered from the gallery all those years ago. "Maybe," she said, "but this time we design it together." The path forward was uncertain, but it was no longer dark, and it was a path they would walk for the first time side by side. The story of Arthur and Genevieve Pembroke is more than just a mystery of a vanishing wife. It's a chilling exploration of what can happen when communication dies and we become strangers in our own homes. Their multi-million-dollar fortress became a symbol of emotional isolation, proving that the most secure walls can't protect a relationship from the secrets hiding within. It's a stark reminder that what we don't say can be far more damaging than any argument, and that sometimes the person we've lost is living right above our heads waiting to be heard. What would you have done in Arthur's position? What would you have done if you were Genevieve? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.